And we're live, guys. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning Liberty. Hello, my name is Michael Boldin. It is Wednesday morning, October the 24th, 2018, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast in downtown Los Angeles, where I broadcast live on YouTube via my home office and studio for the 10th Amendment Center. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me today. I do want to thank all the many people. Our subscriber number on YouTube has been going up steadily, much faster than it was before I started doing this show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So if you like what we're doing, as I say every single show, smash that like button. And it doesn't have to just be on YouTube. We end up posting to a number of social networks throughout the day after we do the live recording. And while I absolutely hate Facebook, for example, I hate it. I still use it, and I see it as a tool where we continue to reach new people, so we'll continue doing that. We do post a link to our website where we have the embedded video on Facebook later. We also upload the video to BitChute.com, where we're getting small numbers, but they're consistent and picking up, and also to the newly named Brighteon.com, which, interestingly enough, is... I like the platform, at least on the producer end. I'd love to see them implement live, and I have a funny feeling Mike Adams, who started that, who got demonetized, I think, some time ago from YouTube, maybe even in Google searches, hisnaturalnews.com. So I think Mike is on a personal vendetta to build something that is open and free and not going to be censored. I have a feeling he'll probably start adding those features as well. So Brighteon.com, interestingly enough, over there, while oftentimes we get almost no views, on the other hand, the videos that hit get more than we get on YouTube or BitChute by far. So if we get a few hundred here on YouTube, sometimes we'll get just as many or up to 1,000 or more over on Brighteon. So it's a feast or famine over there, but we're going to keep posting, and I really appreciate the people who are actually migrating over to alternate platforms. We're also on Minds.com. We're also on Minds.com, and Gab.ai will probably get over on Steemit as well. Good morning to Justin Bayola. Oh, he says bad slow mode. That must be a setting in the live chat. Let me get that changed here. Yeah, it says enable slow mode. Done. That should be clear. As long as everybody's cool, we're good. Hello to everyone, and I want to talk a little bit about socialism. This has been coming across my RSS feeds lately. I use Feedly.com, which is a nice app on my phone, and also I primarily use it on the browser. So I appreciate that service, and I subscribe to a number of websites: Future of Freedom Foundation, Mises Institute, Antiwar.com, LouRockwell.com. I also look at the other libertarian organizations like Cato or Reason. I read some mainstream publications like JustSecurity.org. I read some garbage ones, all kinds of stuff. Will Johnson says, Michael, do you have the ability to add a feature to upload images? On YouTube, no, I don't think I have the ability to allow you guys to do that. So maybe somewhere else there's an app that allows that. So today I want to talk about socialism. And a couple of articles started coming up in my feeds as I go through through my reader, talking about this op-ed that the president did about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, and maybe a lot of other people talked about it. But I think it kind of ties in to a mentality that people have had for quite a long time. I remember, now we started in 2006. A lot of people incorrectly believe that the 10th Amendment Center came out of the Tea Party movement. We are certainly prior to that. We started in 2006, back when the Bush administration was in office. I felt that it was important to just start blogging about the fact, and it's because I heard so many people talk about they were constitutionalists, and then you would see that they were okay with the Bush administration, which gave us the Patriot Act, the Real ID Act, all kinds of unconstitutional war, No Child Left Behind, just Medicare Part D, all kinds of nasty things. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to start blogging about this. But during the Tea Party days, I remember regularly, and I used to go speak at a lot of these rallies, really challenging people to do something rather than just voting in some Tea Party candidate in Washington, D.C. And I think that has been proven correct, that that is a foolish and dangerous strategy if that is your only strategy. Look, if you choose to vote for one guy over the other, or one woman or the other, or one person over the other, let's say one monster over the other. I think that's probably the best way to put it. And if that's your only strategy, you shouldn't be surprised when government always grows. In fact, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison warned us that if you relied on the federal government to limit the extent of its own powers, you shouldn't be surprised if that power always grows. And there are various ways that we can rely on the government to limit its own powers, and that's by expecting the federal courts to limit federal power, expecting a federal president to veto federal laws or stop using the federal power, the executive power that was used before them, or in the hopes that the new bums that you vote in to replace the old ones, which never seems to really happen in any large numbers, but if somehow all this history that shows that incumbents almost always win, that somehow the new bums are going to say, oh, all this power that's in my hand now, I don't need it, I don't want it, I'm not going to use it. This just doesn't work. So during those days, I used to see, and maybe you've seen in the news or on Google, these signs that people would take and say, hands off my Medicaid. Hands off my Medicare. I guess that slow mode is annoying. I got a couple of people. Gerard Perry says slow mode is off. Who's good. So we'd see these posts that say, hand off my Medicare, hand off my Medicaid, hand off my Social Security. And it's as if they were being small government Tea Party types and taxed enough already, as if the status quo was okay. But don't touch these other programs. And Donald Trump wrote an op-ed for the USA Today a couple of weeks ago talking about basically this mentality. Now, he wasn't addressing this mentality, but he was expressing it by saying that he's going to do everything that he can. He keeps repeating that he's going to do everything he can to make sure that the socialist Democrats don't ruin Social Security and Medicare, which is absurd. So let's look at what Jacob Hornberger had to say over at Future of Freedom Foundation. And he's got this article that was published on October 11th. Again, I will post links to this on YouTube and on our website and wherever we can, wherever we're posting this, we're going to have links in our show notes. And it's titled Trump's Unwitting Devotion to Socialism. And he basically goes through this op-ed that the president wrote and really hammers it because there's either ignorance or total hypocrisy there. He says, Donald Trump and unfortunately many of his conservative followers are absolutely clueless when it comes to socialism. And you couldn't find, he says, a better example of this phenomenon than in his op-ed from the USA Today. This was actually published on the 10th. Jacob writes, in his op-ed, Trump takes Democrats to task for supporting Medicare for All, which would essentially be a full-fledged socialist healthcare program. Awesome. Jacob says, all right, we're off on the right track. If you're writing an op-ed, you're the president. Most presidents don't really write too many op-eds. I mean, we know that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798 calling for nullification of any unconstitutional federal act. He did that as a sitting vice president, but he had to do it secretly because the Alien and Sedition Acts that were signed by John Adams, who I spoke highly of in a previous episode, but this horrible law that was signed by Adams and was pushed through by his supporters basically said it was illegal to put the president in to put government in ill repute, but there was an exception, the vice president, Thomas Jefferson. So he wrote this in secrecy. And this is rare, I think. Maybe I just haven't paid attention enough in recent years. And in many years, I actually just ignored Washington, D.C. because I had to spend, and I still do spend most of my time focusing on rejecting, resisting, and nullifying on a state level. But I've been trying to pay attention a little bit more because people like to talk about it, and I think it exposes the problems that we face today to actually explore this. So, excellent. The president writes, we should oppose Medicare for all. Absolutely. On board with that. And here's how Jacob puts it from there. But then he completely goes off the rails, as conservatives inevitably do, by inadvertently revealing that he and his fellow conservatives are as devoted to socialism as Democrats and liberals are. And here's what Trump writes. I also made a solemn promise to our great seniors to protect Medicare. That is why I'm fighting so hard against the Democrats' plan that would eviscerate Medicare. And he says, I am committed to resolutely defending Medicare and Social Security from the radical socialist plans of the Democrats. I mean, I just got to absorb that. The socialist plan is supposedly the dangerous one. Absolutely correct. The socialist plans are the dangerous ones, especially if you're talking about free market economics, more liberty. These are the dangerous ones, especially when you're talking about Washington, D.C., where the Constitution doesn't authorize any of these programs. So, yes, the socialist program is dangerous, but the socialist plan is not undermining the socialist plan. So it is absolutely absurd to say that you're protecting Medicare and Social Security, which are huge socialist programs, from socialism. I mean, it shows that you're either clueless or you're intentionally trying to mislead people. Hornberger puts it this way. He really hammers it. Social Security and Medicare are themselves socialist programs. Period. In fact, they are the crown jewels of America's welfare state way of life. The crown jewels. These are the ones that came out of FDR and the Great Society and the Bush administration when Medicare Part D, the largest expansion in federal control over health care since President Johnson. He says this is a type of socialist system that both Democrats and Republicans have foisted onto the American people. What Trump and other conservatives simply cannot bring themselves to acknowledge is that the welfare state economic system to which they are so devoted is based on the Marxian principle of using the state to take from those who have the money and giving it to those who ostensibly need the money more. Over in the chat, hi to EHP Training, President Accounted For. Good morning. Make sure you smash that like, everybody. Gerald Perry responds to Will Johnson, who calls Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Gerard is correct. Sorry for keeping saying Gerald. I apologize, because it is. And Justin agrees. Gerard says, but it's lasted for X number of years. So many people have told us that. We've heard that. Well, I've paid into the system, and we'll address that in another article that we're going to cover here in a moment. I've paid into the system, or it's been around so long. It can't be a Ponzi scheme. It can't be socialism, because socialism comes down to pieces. Or it can't be a Ponzi scheme. But that, if it walks like a duck, we know it's a duck, right? Hornberger goes on, and if you're not reading Future of Freedom Foundation, I think you should regularly. It's really good stuff. He writes things that are going to be very challenging for a lot of people. But I think this article is pretty easy peasy for most of us here. He says Social Security and, Social Security and Medicare did not originate with America's founding fathers or the framers. That's why there is no authorization for either program in the U.S. Constitution. And I actually should cover an article that we published years ago, I think around 2009, calling Social Security unconstitutional, going through it step by step from the constitutional basis. We should really resurrect that and push that out there a little bit more. He also points out that this is also why Americans lived without these two socialist programs for more than a century. The idea for both programs originated among German socialists at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the early 1900s. Social Security was adopted in the 1930s by FDR as part of the New Deal, and Medicare was in the 1960s from Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society. These are socialist programs, and for anyone to say that they're fighting socialism from stopping those programs, I mean, maybe expanding, I don't know what they're thinking to say you're stopping the socialism by protecting the socialist programs, by just not calling it that. And I think that's the trick that's been foisted on so many people, is that they call it something else. I remember my dad used to always tell me, I love him, but disagree with him on a number of things. He would tell me over and over again, the United States Postal Service isn't a government program. It's privately owned. And maybe they have, I don't know, I haven't looked at the founding documents, but it is a government monopoly. UPS and FedEx certainly don't have the ability to deliver first-class mail. So even if it were owned by an individual that had stocks and they could trade, whatever it may be, even if it seemed like a private corporation, which I'm pretty sure it is not, even if it did, if it is backed by government force, then it might as well be a government-run company. So Hornberger had another article over at the Mises Institute just yesterday. So he followed up on this, and he's been really hitting this theme over and over again, talking about this idea of socialism and how people are basically covering their ears. No, I hate socialism, but don't get rid of my Social Security. Social Security. And this one's called Few Dare Call It Socialism, Social Security and Medicare. And this is a really interesting attack. Whatever one might say about liberals, for example, leftists and progressives, one thing is certain. When it comes to socialism, they get it. They understand that welfare state programs like Social Security and Medicare are socialist programs. And that's fine by them because they love socialism. They're being honest. Let's give them a point for honesty. We'd take a point away for economic ignorance, but a point for honesty. So the other day, commondreams.org, if you've read it, this is definitely a leftist website, very progressive. And they had an article published there that was responding to Trump's op-ed. And it basically said, hey, Mr. President, if you love Medicare so much, why don't you just improve it and expand it to everyone? It's Medicare for all. So you love it so much, you want to protect it. We just want to expand it. And maybe that's what Trump wants to supposedly protect it from. Maybe he's actually acknowledging that expanding it to everybody is a socialist program, and that will actually cause it to collapse. True. But ignoring the fact that it already is a socialist program. And in fact, a collapsed socialist program is probably a far better socialist program than an ongoing one. So one that perpetuates year in and year out, decade in and decade out, does more harm over the long term, I think, to one that falls to pieces. Not that I'm advocating for government to do more. I don't want them to do any of it. But I think there's an argument to be made there. So Jacob goes on over at Mises. So here you have a leftist making a very logical argument. She's actually saying, quote, given that you conservatives love Medicare, which guarantees government health care for seniors, why not love it even more by expanding it to everyone? This shows the hypocrisy of the mentality. And he says, you see, the way conservatives have gotten around this problem for decades is simply by saying that Social Security and Medicare are part of America's free enterprise system. The word socialism to describe these two programs has been absolutely verboten, stricken from the conservative vocabulary when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, because conservatives do not want to be perceived to be advocates of socialism. And we're not even talking about the war or the foreign policy socialism here. We're literally just talking about these very old school, these establishment socialist programs that go all the way back to FDR. So if you just call it something else, then you can pretend that you're not a socialist. But that just because you call it something else doesn't mean it is something else. Hornberger continues. He says, Social Security and Medicare are the exact opposite of freedom. These two socialist programs are based on coercion, and that is the basis of all government programs. You may have heard in some libertarian circles people talking about the barrel of the gun. Every government program is enforced by the threat of violence. And some people say, well, you have to have that threat. But the thing is, when you start getting to this level, now, there are people who want none. That's fine. I know Matt Hugh, who turns in pretty often, is an ANCAP, would probably argue for none, make the case. But wherever you end up on that spectrum, whether you want none or little or very little or constitutional or local or whatever it may be, the more that you give them power to do stuff, the more they're going to keep doing it. And that's been the message that I've been putting out over and over. The more that you turn a blind eye, let them expand power, the more that you should expect them to continue on that path. Justin over in the chat says, my wife works in a medical clinic. It's funny how all the state insurance companies now dictate the treatments their patients can receive. State insurance requires a prior authorization for every treatment. Wow, I didn't know that. I have not had insurance in ages. Maybe in my entire adult life. I'm mid-40s now, 45, 46 this fall. And I've never had insurance. I never got the Obamacare mandate. So I guess they're going to try to collect at some point in the future. I did a video that we posted on YouTube that pointed out that there actually is no enforcement mechanism. Even the IRS admits that they don't have a collection option to collect the payment penalty or the coverage penalty, whatever it was called, the mandate. So I just didn't pay it. I'm sure they've got a line item that's collecting some kind of interest that they're going to rack up at some point. If a lot of people have done this, then they're going to try to collect it, but I'm taking my chances. So Justin goes on, he says, so now it's the insurance company that determines your level of care, kind of like a death panel. Well, yeah, and that's the idea behind fascism, mercantilism, corporatism. Mussolini says fascism, or he said fascism should more rightly be called corporatism because truly it's the merger of state and corporate power. So that goes back to the principle that as long as government is dictating how these governments are allowed to act, the more they do that, the more they really are a part of the government. Hornberger says, they are based on coercion. They are based on the concept of mandatory charity. For example, the state's forcible taking of one person's money and giving it to another person based on the Marxian concept of from each according to his ability to each according to his need. You couldn't be more socialist than that. Now, interestingly enough, I think he may have published this over on Future of Freedom Foundation on the 22nd, which would have been Monday. I didn't see it till today, so take it with a grain of salt, but they say few dare call it socialism, but certainly over on the 22nd, 8:20 p.m., we had a tweet out over the 10th Amendment Center in response to Donald Trump. We quoted his tweet where he says, all Republicans support people with pre-existing conditions. All Republicans, he says, are on board with keeping pre-existing condition requirements for insurance companies. And if they don't, they will after I speak to them. I am in total support. Also, Democrats will destroy your Medicare. I will keep it healthy and well. So he's going to keep pre-existing conditions. He's going to keep Medicare. And our only response to that is to call him what he is, socialist. So few do it. But like Hornberger, we're going to continue taking a stand whether it's popular or not. Doesn't matter what circle it is. Again, I go back to when we started. My goal with the 10th Amendment Center was to reach one or two or a handful of people just speaking the truth, because truth doesn't matter. Truth doesn't have to be popular to be true. So we're going to continue speaking truth to that situation. It's socialism no matter what they call it. And this other article just published this morning from the Mises Institute from Ryan McMakin. More than half of America gets more in welfare than it pays in taxes. This is not a free market country. This is not a capitalism really is the wrong term. It's not a free market system here. This is some kind of corporate state socialist system. It is a welfare state in a huge numbers. It may not be to the level of Sweden, and I know some people will talk about Sweden. Ideman, who tunes in from time to time, I believe is from Sweden, and we've talked about this a bit as well. He and I have chatted about this a bit, where basically Sweden, which is held up as this model, really has only been able to pull off this huge welfare state because they were so free market for so long and they got so rich. But over time, that's being whittled away. And that's the same type of thing that's happening here in the United States. Ryan over at Mises writes, more than half of Americans receive more money in various types of government transfer programs: Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, Social Security, than they pay in federal taxes. This is from a report from the Congressional Budget Office released this year. Only the top 2 income quintiles in the U.S. pay more in taxes than they receive in government transfers. So the large section of ranges of income are receiving more. And of course, he cites Ludwig von Mises. He says, as Mises once noted, once we get to the point that a majority of the voting population receives more in benefits than it pays in taxes, then voters will demand more and more wealth be transferred to them through government programs. It will then become politically necessary to extract larger and larger amounts of wealth from a minority in order to subsidize the majority. And as James Bovard put it, market economics, free market, freedom becomes less popular because people learn that they can vote for a living, quote, vote for a living, instead of work for a living. And as long as people keep getting promised new programs, why would things change? They keep demanding the politicians, like, in a way, as H.L. Mencken put it at one point, democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and they deserve to get it, good and hard. And when you've got a guy like Ted Cruz down in Texas, and I cannot let up on that guy, he was willing to shut down the government over funding Obamacare when Barack Obama was president. But now that Trump is in office and he's getting challenged by a leftist, rather than standing strong on principle, the guy voted to fund Obamacare. You can't make this garbage up. Alan Mosley from the Gold Standard stops by, says, I can be bought pretty cheap. Anyone want to vote? Justin, another great comment from Ben Franklin. When the people find, and I do like to verify these quotes, but Justin, hopefully this is a good one. I appreciate you mentioning it. When the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. It sounds like something he would say. He also points out, Justin points out, this is crony corporatism and fascism. Basically, like Justin points out in the chat, basically all government programs are socialist or corporatist. It's just how much are you going to tolerate and how many of them are authorized by the Constitution. So if we can at least start with that basis, only say, okay, we'll deal with this based on what the Constitution allows. And just because the Constitution allows the federal government to do something doesn't mean it should or it has to. It is not a dictation that they need to regulate all piece of commerce. Now, regulate doesn't mean prohibit, of course. They don't have to regulate all of it. They can. They can just say, well, we're going to take a hands-off approach. Now, there's only 30 or 35 powers that have been delegated to the federal government in the Constitution. You can find a bulk of them in Article 1, Section 8. And there's a number of them throughout the rest of it. Everything else has been reserved to the states or the people. So California can be a socialist hellhole if we want it to be here. And Montana could be a free market place. But that's the whole point. When you've got different viewpoints, political, economic, religious viewpoints, all living in a huge landmass like the United States, the only way people can live in peace is if you allow people to go to places or live amongst the people that they tend to agree with and live in a style of governance that fits them best. Now, maybe people in New Hampshire will reduce their system to almost no government. I don't know. And maybe Hawaii will be socialist in every other way. But that's the whole way. Otherwise, what you end up having is what Tom Woods, my good friend Tom, is often called a low-wage civil war of voters from left and right bashing each other over the head to try to get control of the entire federal apparatus. And that's exactly how it's played out. So although few people call it socialism, we certainly will, and we'll continue calling it that, not just to oppose new programs, but to oppose the ones currently on the books that shouldn't exist in the first place. As a reminder, if you have not yet gotten tickets, if you're in Southern California, there's a free event on Sunday, November the 4th from Liberty on the Rocks and RLC Los Angeles County. Myself, Jason Stapleton, and Brian McWilliams. Brian's with Lions of Liberty podcast, which is awesome. We're doing a free brunch hangout, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Well, it's free to hang out. If you want to eat, I guess you got to buy it. I don't know the entire details, but please Come and join us. I'll put a link in the show notes as well. And then on Saturday, November the 10th, I'm speaking at the Abbeville Institute's event in Dallas, Texas, the revival of secession and state nullification. I'll be speaking on the state of the nullification movement. And before we head out today, I want to share this quote, which I think is extremely important, especially in the way things are going these days. Patrick Henry on how to make America great. He says, and he was talking about the mother country at the time. And he probably didn't call it that. He was talking about England. And he said, that country became a great, mighty, and splendid nation, not because their government is strong and energetic. Now, this is prior to its empire building. Not because their government is strong and energetic, but, sir, because liberty is its direct end and foundation. Liberty. And even in that period when liberty is was much less, well, then again, maybe not. I guess we should do a comparison at some point. But the goal, if you want to be great, you advance liberty, not a strong central power that can provide everything for everybody. Socialism is the opposite of what makes the country great. So if we want a MAGA, we need to make America free again. That's absolutely. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I hope you found it interesting. This is really juicy stuff, in my opinion. I really enjoy talking about this. I want to thank all of you who joined in on the live chat, EHP Training, Gerard Perry, Will Johnson, Justin, of course. Justin, you get extra love today. Thanks, man. I appreciate all of you for being here and all the kind comments on the live stream here on YouTube. Good stream from Gerard. And I will be back on Friday morning, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Smash the like button wherever you're watching this video or listening to it. I will be making this into a podcast as well in the near future. Not just yet, but starting pretty soon. I'm also going to be uploading this as a podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, probably Google Play, and elsewhere for those of you who do not want to watch the video. So we are going to do that in the near future. But for the time being, wherever you're watching, make sure to smash that like button, share the link, hit subscribe. We really appreciate you doing that. It helps us spread the word. And I hope you have a great Wednesday and a great rest of the week. I'll see you Friday morning, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Bye-bye now.